Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Benu Community Podcast. This is Ben, your host. And as always, you're here to explore the future of work, leadership, and transformation. Today, I've got an incredible guest with me, Alex Baker-Friesen. I first met him at the TNW conference in Amsterdam last year, and we immediately found some shared values and interests around sustainability, systemic change, and future thinking. Alex is a sustainability transformation strategist, an expert in organizational change, and the founder of Ozymandias Intelligence. And also he's busy with some other projects. Maybe later on he's explain more. He's been working for years to help organizations from startups to universities navigate the complex challenges of climate resilience and sustainability. In this episode, we'll be diving into some really exciting topics. How businesses, professionals, and leaders can embed sustainability into their strategies, how to adopt uncertainty in a rapidly changing world, and how we can move beyond just talking about sustainability to actually building regenerative solutions for the future. So, whether you are an entrepreneur, a corporate leader, or someone looking to make an impact, I think you are going to get a ton of value from this conversation. Let's get into it and asking some questions about his personal and professional journey. But first, Alex, thank you first of all to be here. Maybe you want to add something to my introduction. Feel free to share it, and then I will ask the first question about your personal journey.
Okay. Thank you, Ben, for inviting me here. It was really nice for you to reach out, and I've been really impressed and also similarly welcomed in this amazing community you're building. I found it interesting that you also redefined this primary focus that you have with Benno on the future of work, that you're framing it in terms of leadership and transformation, because these are topics and practical areas that I'm just heavily involved in for a long time, because I've had this question not just in my mind, but in my whole being about how do we actually change these systems to prevent not just doing harm, but actually regenerating the harm that's been done in the past and that continues to be done now. Hence, regenerative being sometimes a better word than sustainability, but I still use sustainability. I had a few years where I was on and off the word because it's been used in various contexts. But for me, I like to start conversations like this with just defining what I mean by sustainability. So for me, sustainability is humanity transforming the way it works with itself and with its living systems around it, upon which we depend, to come into a sort of symbiosis with Earth systems, with society, and with itself, because we're out of sync currently. We've encroached 6 out of 9, I think it's bordering on 7 now, planetary boundaries, and I think the science is clear that we need to change. The question is, how do we change? And where do we change? And what skills and competencies do we need? And that's what I've been busying myself with. So that's what I would add, I suppose.
Maybe it's a good idea to ask, first of all, about how did you get into sustainability transformation? Was there a specific moment that made you realize this was the path for you?
Yeah,
What
I'd
was
have to
that?
rewind back to, so there's a few moments, but I'm going to focus on one.
Main.
Yeah, I was a student in environmental science at the University of Manchester from 2006 to 2009. And primarily, I mean, I was always fascinated with how the earth worked, with nature, with weather, with all sorts of different systems that I could see around me. Growing up, I was very much at home in that environment. I was sort of partially a country boy, partially a city boy, but I was happiest in the countryside for that reason. When it started to get interesting was we had a few courses on the history and politics of climate change from a Serbian professor who had emigrated after the war there in the 90s. And he was very switched on. And I remember just absorbing everything he said. And he mapped out for us when in history, scientists such as Eunice Foote and Svante Arrhenius discovered at various points in the 18th century the warming effect that CO2 has on the atmosphere, and that it's man-made activities which are causing this. And it really struck me how long we've really known this. And the more I learned, the more I guess, dumbfounded I became that we were still emitting all of these gases which were warming the planet out of the habitat dynamic that we've evolved into called the Holocene, which is where the term Anthropocene comes from, right? So geologists literally naming a whole new epoch based on our impact as a geological force on the planet. That's the sort of order of magnitude of impact we've had as a species. So that, I suppose, it radicalized me in inverted commas, right? Then I would have probably become a climate activist if I didn't need to work 2 jobs to stay in uni. But I was having all sorts of different conversations with people behind the bar, people you wouldn't think would be switched on about this, but they knew, they noticed. They just didn't look like it. So we used to call them scallies back in Manchester, which is like the English version of, or the North English version of chav, or people like dressing in tracksuits who look a bit rough. But don't judge by appearances, man. Like, I learned some pretty insightful stuff from just chatting to these people across the bar, because they would always ask me about the book I was reading, because I was multitasking, and I would try and break it down for them. And then I also learned there that it was about communication and interpretation and making it tangible for people, but also meeting them where they were and figuring out, hey, hold on, they don't know nothing. Yeah. So for me, I was learning stuff in the lecture halls, but also through my job. And that wasn't, I suppose, where you build networks that lead to internships to get jobs. And long story short, financial crisis happens. I'm applying to lots of jobs, many jobs, wasn't successful, had to leave England to look for other opportunities, landed in France, became a glorified gardener. My Dutch boss pointed me in the direction of the Netherlands and Sweden, where it was a lot cheaper to do the master's degree that I needed to become the sustainability consultant / professional that I put myself in debt for. The English degree system is very expensive. I'm sure everybody has heard about that. So I went off to Sweden and I started my degree in sustainable development in Uppsala. And that was just an incredible experience, because we had like 40 different nationalities. So my mind just went boom. And I learned so much from people from like Bolivia, Eritrea, South Sudan, several Indians, a couple from Bangladesh. You can imagine what sort of worldviews and mindsets get mixed in there. And I mean, it was a social sciences program as well as a natural sciences program. And it was pretty clear to me early on that change and transformation was key for us to become sustainable. In order to develop sustainably, we need to change fundamentally economic, political systems, social systems, and we need to repair the transformative impact that humanity has had on its environment, because we have also transformed our environment. Biodiversity crises, the climate crisis, amongst others, are indicators of this. So that's when I started to blend the two terms actively. But it's quite complex. There's a lot of different perspectives on this. So it took me quite some time to start to talk about this conversationally. I had to read around it a lot, because I'm not somebody who just blahs everywhere without really, I just don't feel comfortable doing that unless I feel a solid basis of, okay, I understand this enough now to be able to have a conversation across the bar with someone, or on the same side of the bar, because I'm no longer a bartender, right? But yeah, so that's sort of how it happened. It was quite gradual, but there were these triggers, and The people in my life were pretty key to that. The professor, the Scullies in the bar, didn't just took an interest in the book I was reading, which was, when you hear about the stereotypes, that's not what you would think, right? So it's also about class awareness, I suppose.
Thanks for sharing your story. So, which means you are not climate activist yet.
I mean, I'm not a traditional climate activist. I found other ways. Maybe we can
Got
get on to that a bit later, but yeah.
Okay. So, you've worked in academia, startups, and large organizations. What are the biggest differences and challenges in driving sustainability transformation in these different spaces?
I mean, complexity is a big one. And that just count for larger organizations. You would think in smaller organizations like startups or NGOs that it would be simpler, but it's not, because you've got a whole system around you to navigate and deal with funding on both sides, whether for profit or not for profit. Not just funding, but who you're getting your funding from and to what extent they then determine your mission and vision, right? So I think mission drift, and particularly if you're a social enterprise, which has been a core focus of mine from a research perspective, but also from an advisory and a facilitation perspective. There are these quandaries, there are these paradoxes that you get caught up into. And unless you've had like the mentorship or peers or even the ability to educate yourself, I'm not talking about an academic education even, like you could just have access to the right resources, whether it could be in an incubator, an accelerator, working with a university, for example, which is why I think universities have a key role to play. So complexity, awareness of the systems around them. The first workshops I started to do in 2013, it was all about navigating the dynamics around us. And there were 3 steps. So the first step was stakeholder analysis, or you could think of that in terms of ecosystem analysis. So who are the people who have influence and interest in your organization? And then I would start to break that down into, well, which issues do they care about the most? So in terms of environmental, societal, and governance issues. So that's when you start to go into materiality. That's phase 2. You get a long list, and then the long list becomes a short list. And you just make it very tangible for them. And then they start to understand that you need to, tailor it to the different groups around you. And it becomes very human focused rather than sort of abstracted in, I mean, visualization is key. But there are so many frameworks out there, it can be quite bewildering. And that's the other challenge. You have so many frameworks, so many regulations. And I think that's why people sometimes switch off when it comes to sustainability, because they're like, all right, it's another one. And that was something I noticed early on. How do we make all of these frameworks meaningful? Are many of them actually meaningful, or are they just pretty diagrams that academics decided to draw up because it made them feel nice about themselves, and that when they got that published? Because I feel like it goes in that direction too. Some of these diagrams are really interesting. Some are really good, like the planetary boundaries framework. That's when you get into the area of what I call sticky mental models. The mental models that stick in your head, they're really easy to pick up. Anybody can pick them up, and they explain a whole lot. And you don't need to get into the complexity. It's just literally, here are the limits and here are the categories. So that's an example. And there are others that get more in the direction of becoming too complex, or they don't accurately represent the system that they're trying to describe, which is the point of a good model or framework, right? And you have to remember, the definition of a model or framework is that it's an imperfect representation of that system. So you have to be quite circumspect. You have to be quite savvy and, I suppose, critical when you see all of these flashy new frameworks popping up in your LinkedIn screen. You have to ask yourself, okay, what system is this trying to describe? What are the interests behind this? And that's the other challenge that I work with. It's getting this reflection, this circumspection as a competence, so that people get some breathing room and they can slow down and think about their next steps. Because sometimes I think we're by our system, when we're not aware of it, the interests around us, we're accelerated to such an extent we can't really think clearly about what we're doing, or clearly enough. And I think we lose agency and power.
Your PhD focused on organizational transformation. Am I right? So at least for a few years, you focused on this specific concept and area. The point is, as you mentioned, a lot of companies and universities and other entities want to be more sustainable, but they struggle with actually making it happen.
Yeah.
You mentioned it. Is there any main biggest roadblocks that they need to consider, first of all? And then I remember once you mentioned something about a regenerative innovation.
Mm.
I'm curious to learn more about this concept. Can you break that down? How is it different from traditional sustainability approaches?
Okay. I'll start with the roadblocks. And
Oh, by the way, and also you mentioned about the competence.
oh yeah,
Yeah, maybe it's a good idea to add also what are some of the key competencies and mindsets that professionals need to develop to drive a systemic change in their organization.
I'm glad you asked that, because I always finish every slide deck with that list of, and I update it as I go, right? Because it's iterative. But okay, so roadblocks, regenerative innovation, and competences, mindsets.
Yes.
Uh, I mean, it's connected, right? So the roadblocks, let's define leaders as not just executive or non-executive leaders at the top of the organization, but they could be change agents within the organization, with, for example, adopting an ESG manager position or a sustainability strategy lead position. But it could also be DEI. It could be learning and development. It could be strategic program manager. These kinds of roles that sometimes tend to be catch-all terms, where before you know it, I've had these roles before in the past, so I know what happens. You end up with 3 different roles because it's not altogether clearly defined, which is roadblock 1. Clearly define sustainability. It's really basic. Um, it's amazing how many different organizations I've worked with who, one, don't do that to begin with, and then hire the people to work on it. They have it in their sustainability or their strategic program, let's say, but they haven't defined what they mean by it in clear terms that make sense to people.
It's just kind of trends they want to follow, something like that.
Well, yeah, in a way, it's like jumping on the bandwagon, right? They know it's important, they know it's fashionable, and they know they can get funding or money from it.
And it's
So,
fancy, and nice to talk about how we are sustainable and something.
yeah, sorry, I just accidentally moved my chair down because I'm getting excited there. But no, it's something I care about, because define what you mean. Really important. Otherwise, it's not going to be meaningful and engaging with people that need to do the work. It doesn't matter per se which theory you use, as long as it's accurate and scientifically enough grounded. I'm not saying do an entire thesis on it. There's so much great literature out there about sustainability that goes back literally decades. So choose, make your pick. There's no need to bring in a consulting firm then 3 years later when you haven't done that work. And then you save yourself easily a few tens of thousands. I don't know how much consultants are charging these days in that regard, because, well, there's a big variance there. That's another thing. The other roadblock is you have to stay focused. There will be barriers, there will be challenges, but I believe that your first priority as a leader should be to believe in the internal competencies and the internal potential within your organization. If you've got the expertise in your teams to solve those problems, like, 1, you should be aware of that. 2, you should give them the trust to try and solve that problem before you bring in any number of consulting firms. And I'm not anti-consulting. I'm just saying there has to be a good reason to bring in a consultant on these issues. Yeah. And I mean, consulting, they can help you get an overview. They can help you, okay, which regulation should be working with? Should we be doing EcoVadis? Should we do B Corp? Should we, all of these different things. But you have to define your terms first. You have to define what your vision is, what your mission is, what your values are. And that's quite straightforward to do as long as you've got people who have the skills to facilitate that within your teams. And sometimes you've already got those people. Sometimes you need to bring in a facilitator to help kick that off. And that's what I do. I start with facilitation. That's like my primary skill set, self-describing word for a reason. It's because it goes all the way back to Manchester. I started to learn when I was volunteering. I was volunteering for a local climate group, and I was being taught how to facilitate in rooms full of environmental professionals and activists and sort of generals, in inverted commas, hippie types, about how to put it all into practice. And I would just sit there with my notebook and I would ask them questions, and I would go from subgroup to subgroup, and then I would cluster and, all the rest of it. And then before you know it, you've got a meaningful language at the end of several sessions. And that's the process I'm looking at. That internal process. One, it's hard to make visible and marketing ready, let's say, unless you're describing it authentically. But then, what platform are you using? And is it correct to start communicating that early? That's the other roadblock, right? The other roadblock is jumping into communications mode before you've adequately focused on that, because you need to be present with those people who are going to be doing the work later. That's an important process. And that's what I call, it's going to get a little bit into philosophy now, but it's because I did the research on this.
It's fine because I'm really interested in philosophy. As you know, I already studied philosophy.
So I'm a big fan of Hannah Arendt. And she was, as you know,
Yeah,
a sweeping philosopher, Jewish philosopher, who shaped her thinking around the rise of authoritarian regimes and fascism in Nazi Germany. And she studied how people I interpreted it as maintaining their agency and power in those dynamics. How do they survive? What are the quandaries? And she defined something that was quite interesting. She talked about human action and praxis. And the way she described praxis was really powerful for me. She said it's an innate human condition to put into practice a sort of trained skill, competence, or learned lesson in a group of people, and to create something new. And I'm saying this now also as an attempt to answer your second question about regenerative innovation, because for me, these two things are very connected. You give people the space to do that. You hold space for them, and some pretty powerful shit comes up. The role of leadership, in my opinion, is to make space for that, amplify it, and turn that into a demonstrable, sometimes even replicable process. And that you want to try and spread that throughout the whole organization. And that's the transformation I'm talking about. Because the mode of working before that was probably very mechanical, indicators all over the place, little time to think because we're always just reacting to the next trend. Quick, get that communication report out there. Quick, jump on that next strategy. There's just so much complexity, too many workflows, too few people, too little space to actually think and reflect, to have the kind of transformative impact that we need to have in order to become sustainable, right?
You mean one of the main role of the leaders, or I don't know, senior managers or something like that, is kind of building a playground.
In a way, yeah. Innovation at its heart has its creativity. It's
Right.
allowing this entrepreneurial drive, which is connected to the human condition. Children do this easily because
That's right.
we're born with it. But somewhere along the way, we're all either told that it's not practical. Not everybody can do this. Not everybody is creative. I disagree. Everybody is creative. It just depends what their art and craft is. Everybody can create something. They just have different personalities, different backgrounds, different walks of life. And that's why diversity is so important, because if you don't have a clear policy on how to bring those people together, then it's actually going to negatively impact your innovation. You can't have groupthink in a process like that. You can't have toxic work cultures. You can't have ignorance on different
Like,
cultures outside of the global north. It doesn't work. I've literally tried this. I've literally not just experimented with it, but I've witnessed where it does work and where it doesn't work. And that's why I bring diversity, equity, and inclusion together with sustainability when I'm talking about transformative innovation or regenerative.
because in that way, when you are talking about sustainability in that way, social equity and also well-being are really important as well, right?
Yeah. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, there are literal goals on these. But for a reason, it's in the fabric of this internationally agreed framework on how to sustainably develop.
Hmm.
Really, you can't extract it. You can't disconnect all of these concepts.
Right.
It's embedded.
So, how about the competences and mindsets? Do you want to add more details on them?
I could, if there's space.
Yep.
I think you've touched upon them a little bit. So, I mean, leadership is a big one. The kind of leadership we're talking about has to be emotionally intelligent as well as read up. Hmm? You need to be able to tune into your people and yourself, because you bring energy into the room and in a position of power that has influence, whether you realize it or not, whether you like it or not. Your emotional state has an effect. And even if you think you're not emotional, human beings pick that up. There is always another conversation under the surface, and that's how work cultures evolve. A specific type of leadership trait that fits in that organization makes an imprint. And you can have positive leadership traits that welcome all of the, and sculpt and shape and support all the things we've been talking about. Or you can have leaders, and there's so much literature on this, and I mean, you see it everywhere in the world right now, with could be narcissistic traits, sociopathic, borderline. I'm bringing in psychology now. I hope that's all right, but that's where my journey's taken me because it helps me understand. And I mean, not only are they traumatized themselves and they don't realize it, but they bring that into the workplace. And then people start to figure out, all right, well, these traits are being rewarded, so I better start, you know, and I'm allowed to behave like this. And you get all sorts of damaging behaviors, which are normalized. And that's not what we want. But so when I'm talking about competencies, I'm talking about self-reflection. I'm talking about self-awareness. I'm talking about do the inner work. The higher you get in your position of responsibility, the more responsible you are to do that inner work because you have more influence. That's my opinion. It's not just an opinion. I've researched it.
More
So
power, more responsibility.
it makes sense. It's just really, it's actually quite straightforward. I'm not sure you saw the old Spider-Man movies, but it's not even just in the movies. But with great power comes great responsibility, right? It's very straightforward. So, what do we mean by responsibility? It's the ability to respond consciously in the moment to the people you have in the room. So I'm talking not just about the traits I've already mentioned, but presence, being present with them. Yes, you need structure. Yes, you need management competencies. That's key too. But these things don't get enough attention. They're getting more attention, which is interesting, but they're still called soft skills, which I find interesting because they're not easy to learn.
That's right.
No, they're actually quite difficult. And you have to really confront these sometimes quite challenging experiences you've had, which have caused, let's call them maladaptive behaviors. We've all had negative experiences in our past that have impacted the way we behave in various ways, and we're all working on that, or sometimes running away from it. I was running away from it. I thought I was learning. I was learning up here, but I wasn't learning here. And eventually it caught up with me. And I'm glad it did, because now I'm a bit more integrated. So that's what I mean as well. It's about combining head and heart, and not giving credence to this stereotype or social, I'm going to call it a social norm, that these skills are somehow less than, that they're less serious, that they shouldn't be as central as all of the other skills, because that's how we got into this mess. We weren't paying attention.
Good. As I know, and as I remember, leadership is a big theme in your work. I know you can talk about leadership and leadership traits and how we need to cultivate them for navigating uncertainty and driving transformation. I was thinking maybe it's a good idea in the future we set a time for kind of, for example, I don't know, another event on or another episode talking more in that specific area if you agree.
Sounds great.
Let's talk about it later. But I want to mention something about Benu community. As you know, at Benu community, we are trying to bring future thinking approaches in the area of SMEs and maybe startup ecosystem. This is our main focus area.
Yeah.
That's why now I want to ask you about small businesses or entrepreneurs, those who want to start integrating sustainability.
Yeah.
Okay, so where's the best place to start for them?
I said it a little bit earlier. Like,
Yes, you mentioned some specific and important point, but now sometimes when I'm talking with them or communicating with them in terms of how they can, for example, apply futures literacy in their current endeavors to think how to cope with the challenges in the future using the future for acting in the present, something like that. Usually, they just say, "Okay, go away." We prefer to.
abstract, or sometimes even esoteric. Um, I would say you start quite practically with the people around you, which is why it made sense for me to start with stakeholders, with the people in your organization, just learning a bit more about their skills and competencies, like where you are right now, before you even start thinking about embedding new things. You need to know what the thing is that you're embedding it into, right? Like you've maybe run your small business on, let's say, textiles. Let's say you run a clothing company, and now you've heard all these stories about collapsing factories and fast fashion and Shrine and Zara and all the rest of it, and you're aware of that, and you need to read up on it. But first, just check in with your organization, check in with where you are. Everybody has a basic understanding of the organization they work with, but a lot of it is often unsaid or under the surface. So it makes sense to have somebody, if you can't do it, and somebody else, give them some time to do that. Maybe even a small team. And that's the beginning of organizational learning, right? So that's quite key.
And
Uh,
there's no specific formula for everyone everywhere, right?
no, exactly. And that's why I shy away from general questions without knowing a bit more about the organization in question. So in terms of where to start, it often really depends, but generally I would say start with the people who have influence on your organization, externally or directly connected to it, but also
Wait,
in
which means the context or contexts are really important and they matter. Hmm.
absolutely. Don't trust blueprints. Don't trust blueprints. There are helpful frameworks that I mentioned earlier, but blueprinting, I
But
mean,
there's a big but.
yeah, there's a big but. I mean, there are patterns, there are
Right.
action strategies, there are, shared value sets, their worldviews, but you've got to contextualize. If you're not paying attention to that, you're just some, I'm trying to choose the right words here. Let's say you come in, you prescribe with your preconceived notions of what's needed for this organization, and you haven't really done your homework on. I'm thinking from a consulting perspective now.
Good.
Uh,
Good.
yeah, so you shouldn't prescribe. You need to work with them, and that's why I describe myself as an action researcher, because I use the practice of research to bring people in that organization into that inquiry, and I take them by their hands out of their comfort zones a little bit by little bit in these processes that I was talking about. And I have them ask very fundamental questions about their values and about what they're good at and about what their team's good at and what their organization's good at, or what's getting in the way of that, right? For me, that should be underneath the sustainability strategy. Then you have your ESG, then you have your GRI or your EcoVadis or everything else, right?
Alex, what's exciting you the most right now in terms of emerging sustainability trends or climate innovation? And also, looking ahead, what do you think are the biggest sustainability challenges businesses and professionals, I don't know, need to be prepared for?
Mm-hmm. What's been exciting me a lot recently are the inner development goals. So there's it's a framework, but it's not per se just a framework. It supports an existing one. So I mentioned the sustainable development goals earlier. Well, here we are 10 years after their signing and approval, and 5 years before we're meant to be achieving them, and we're nowhere near halfway. So something's going wrong. And a bunch of academics and community organizers and facilitators, mainly in the global north, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, etc., came up with a new system of goals focused on inner development. So I think like one of them's compassion, one of them's collaboration, and one's empathy, and these kinds of things, right? So interpersonal competencies, the kind to which I was talking about earlier. And when they first came out in 2022, I was very interested because they were saying things that a lot of us in my kind of space have been saying for a while. However, what I found difficult, and the reason why I have these projects right now, I have 2 projects actually. I have one with some master students, Master Sustainability Institute, looking into how we embed the inner development goals into purpose driven or impact oriented organizations, how that may contribute to organizational transformation for sustainability. So we transform in order to become more sustainable, in order to have more positive social or environmental impact, right? So I think this is one major trend that I'm seeing. It's the attention on this human dimension, on this inner dimension. But there is a tension there. And the tension is that it's difficult. It's unconsciously difficult for people to think or confront themselves in these ways, because that involves accepting some difficult things sometimes from our past. And you need the right people in the room for that. So I have been concerned that it might go in a direction where it doesn't really get to the substance of what it's trying to do. So my idea was to make sure that we have the adequate psychological basis for that framework, because yes, they were very intelligent and highly experienced, this group of people, and they admit this. They go, right, well, we're not including enough people from the global south, so that's the next phase of our project. But they're so busy, they all have second, third jobs, right? It's not a new framework. There's not a lot of big funders behind them yet, and that's the next bit I'm going to get to. So they need support. And that's why I have these projects, because I want to work with them. And that's really exciting because it seems like we're on to something. And I want to be writing and sharing more about this later. But I want to also answer your question. So I think this connects to this sort of broader trend I'm seeing where you have these networks and movements across different interests, or sometimes even in resistance to geopolitical trends. We can't avoid the times we're living in at the moment. We can't avoid Trump, Musk, the tech barons, this oligarchical, kakistocratic, kleptocratic evolution towards fascism. We can't, we have to call a spade a spade. So when I'm talking sustainability challenges, I'm also bringing these in. What are the challenges that you have sometimes no control over that you need to mitigate for? So there's a risk perspective here. You can have your nice shiny sustainability strategy. You can do everything right. And then along comes a dictator and all the regulations are out the window, which is literally what's happening in the US right now, by the way. And not just the US. So it threatens the progress we want to make. And if you're a small business, that's very difficult. Even if you're a mid-sized business doing very well, it's very difficult because you put a lot of money into, sometimes if you're further along your sustainability journey, you've already invested a lot. You've realized the gains and the benefits, and that's a threat. So what do? You can't just work as one organization. You need to work in syndicate. You need to build partnerships. And that's also what I find really exciting. So I'm partnering and I do advice for a company that's trying to do this called Radical Value Agency.
Yeah.
The idea with Radical Value Agency is it's a strategic business design agency focused on people and planet, focused on flipping the fiduciary responsibility on its head and helping companies make that transition with the SaaS, the infrastructure, the strategic background. And what I really like about Quintus Cropola's approach is he's like, I don't have all the answers. I have my corporate background, but I'm just going to bring a bunch of people together who have different areas of expertise. And that's what he's done. So he works with advisors like me, and he deploys us to visionary impact ventures that want to make a difference but are struggling to get off the ground. And I don't see that just being applicable to new ventures. I see it being applicable to SMEs who are realizing they have to make some kind of transition. And the business model is very interesting. It's not a traditional consulting model. It's profit sharing. It's okay, as Radical Value Agency, we're going to buy shares in your company, and then our performance is determined by how our buyback, our ROI is determined by our performance at helping you best.
Nice.
Right. And imagine a syndicate of businesses doing that for each other, right? That's what I find really interesting, because at heart, I'm an ecologist, right? I see living systems supporting each other, and there's no waste, and it's created destruction, and it's resilience in a network. I think, I'm not sure I would call it a trend, but for me, you talked about regenerative earlier. That's a big trend. And that's when I'm saying regenerative, I mean, we need to regenerate the systems around us to create more resilience. And that's what we need in order to become sustainable as well. We can transform, we can do all of the rest of it, but we have to also build competencies to withstand the old system breaking down as we're building the new one, right?
Right. So I want to ask the last question. Maybe in 2-3 minutes, we will finish it. If you could give just one piece of advice to someone who wants to make an impact in the sustainability space, what would it be?
Stop. Get off your train. You don't even realize you're on a train sometimes. So really consciously stop, slow down, give yourself space. It's a lot. You need perspective. Speak to people that you feel drawn to. Trust your instincts. Do your own research. Have the people you build trust with do research. You don't need to spend a great deal of time doing this. It could just be a a couple of hours every week. Just build it into your schedule. And before you make any decision whatsoever, just make sure you're clear on what you really want and why
Right.
you want to become sustainable.
Thank you. Also, I can mention this was inspiring conversation. I enjoyed a lot, Alex. And
But
thank you so much sharing your insights. I really feel like we covered so many important aspects of sustainability, innovation, and the future of work and emerging trends and the things like that. We will publish this episode soon at Bennu Community Podcast, and it's available on different platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, and others. Hopefully, people uh, follow this and engage in these kind of conversations. I think if they want, they can also follow you on LinkedIn and approaching you directly. And if it's fine with you, we can share your LinkedIn link in the description of this episode.
yeah, no problem.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to be part of community of forward thinkers who are shaping the future of work and sustainability and the things like that, they can join us at Benu Community. We offer workshops, consulting, and a great network to, help them to grow. For example, we have a club, recently we launched this podcast and some other things as well. Thank you again. I enjoyed a lot and hope to see you soon again around. If you have anything as the last word, feel free to share it.
Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to seeing where you're taking this community, Ben. And yeah, I really welcome and appreciate your presence and your attention to the talents and expertise of the people around you. And I think it's pretty clear that that vision is behind this community. And that what also excites me is seeing communities like this come up. And that's what brought me here. So thank you.
See you soon.
Cheers. Speak soon, Ben. Bye.
Bye.